Good afternoon, everybody, for joining this discussion today, which is to kind of we are calling it stock taking of India's readiness to implement. Just giving a quick background. The context of this meeting is the fact that we are now in a world which has kind of gone beyond discussing about what the targets should be, because we know the long-term targets of different countries. And of course, we see that in negotiations, there is a agenda where the timelines are to be discussed, to be kind of pushed a little earlier, so that the goal of Paris Agreement to get to net zero by 2050 is more within the reach. But in practical terms, we all know that now the key issue is that of implementation, because unless and until we get into increasing the rate of implementation as well as capability to implement the short-term targets that we have set, the learning curve is really going to be a major factor in terms of how soon or how quickly we would be able to kind of ramp up achievement of long-term targets, even if they were to be kind of preponed. So it's important to think about implementation simultaneously, while we keep exploring the possibilities of bringing long-term targets closer to before mid-century at the global level. Now, when we think about implementation, it is one thing to implement an individual project, but when we are thinking about long-term transitions, then the process of implementation has to be robust, and that can not happen unless and until various aspects of implementation capacity are properly institutionalized. Now, the institutional foundation of implementation can vary from policy to policy, from one governance level to another governance level. But ultimately, we have to eventually think about what is the overall ecosystem within which climate policies, climate strategies would be implemented. Now, from that understanding, some of us who are a part of a network called Climate Transparency, which has been bringing out climate transparency report for last couple of years for G20 countries, which was more about tracking the policy commitments, basically, started thinking that we need to go beyond the announcements and look at what underlies those announcements. And as an entry point, we developed a tool or an approach we call implementation check. And we said that, okay, to begin with, we look at the legal foundation, what is the governance support mechanism, what are the resource provisions, and what is the monitoring. These are the four initial aspects to think about when we think about what is the implementation capability at ground. And then this was tested kind of with quick studies. These are all short studies that partners have done. We covered Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Germany, Indonesia, South Africa, and India. Now, the tool was initially designed to follow, to check whether one specific policy has the necessary implementation support. But we thought that since we are eventually talking about an ecosystem, and in more so in developing country context, it's the ecosystem where perhaps the traditional theories or traditional understanding of policy processes and efficiency do not really work in kind of the linear manner. It is important to think about the ecosystem. So for India, we decided that we look at the tool and use the tool to look at three different policy developments in India. One is the solar mission, the other is carbon market, and the third is the green hydrogen mission. Now we understand that this tool is just a entry level tool in the sense that we are looking at very broad aspects. But the idea was basically to see whether by looking at these simpler indicators, can we make sense of how the broad direction of ecosystem that would eventually enable implementation is evolving. So the purpose of this event is or this gathering today is to basically initiate that discussion and see where we can go forward. So obviously we would invite all our panelists, which we have Ritu here, we have Ulka and Mahua. Unfortunately, Mr. Gulati from Toyota Kirloskar had to go for another meeting, so he had to cancel at the last minute. But so we take this as an initial discussion where we reflect simultaneously on the tool itself, but also how do you think we should look at the implementation preparedness of India based on your own work and engagement with different actors. So I look forward to a very exciting and interesting discussion. We obviously have in Mr. Rashmi, who will moderate the panel discussion, with who has a much more direct experience of creating the institutional capability for implementing climate policies. So we will benefit from his insights as well. But before we get into the panel discussion, I would request my colleague Tanvi to give us a quick peek into how the implementation check tool was applied in India's context. Tanvi, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Manish. Ashmita, just I hope everybody is able to see the slides.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, great. So thank you, Dr. Manish, for that background and good afternoon to everybody present here in person and who all have joined us online. So as the theme suggests, we shall be delving into the significant strides that India is making towards a sustainable future. And as Dr. Manish suggested, it's through the ecosystem of climate policies that India is leading at the minute. So for this study, Climate Transparency and TERI use this tool called Climate Policy Implementation Check, which essentially helps us to understand how well a policy is in action based on 4 areas, mainly the legal status or the legal backing, institutions and governance, resourcing, which we can think of it in terms of budget, and oversight slash monitoring. So as we all know, India is committed to reducing the emission intensity of its GDP by 45% by 2030 as compared to the 2005 levels. Also, we aim to achieve 50% of the electric capacity installation from non-fossil based resources by the same year. And for this, India has various policies which are backing these targets. And for this study, as Dr. Manish already has listed the 3 policy interventions that have been assessed, here is the ambition check rating that is high based on the assessment that we did using the implementation tool. So we essentially assessed national solar mission, green hydrogen mission, as well as the Indian domestic carbon market. And based on the results of the assessment, we came up with an ambition check as high for India. Now, before we move into the results or the findings for each of these policies, the check can be understood in nutshell through this slide. So essentially what we do is for all 4 categories, we have some questions that we ask for each policy intervention. So for instance, if you're talking about the legal status, the question is there a legal basis for the implementation? On the other hand, if you're talking about resourcing, then the question that one can ask is if the policy instrument has budgetary implications, also the implementing body, is it well resourced, and is it even existing at the appropriate level? So similarly, we have other such questions for oversight and institutions and governance. All these questions are already there in the report. Now, these questions are then transformed into categorical variables because the questions are qualitative in nature, and in order to understand what ranking or score a given policy can get, we need to put them into categories. So let's pick up any one such category. So for example, for legal status, if the question is there a legal basis for implementation, then we have 4 different categories. And based on the answer, we give a ranking to that question. So W, M, S, and NA essentially stands for weak, medium, strong, and NA is not applicable or not rated yet. So there are certain questions which are either not applicable or for a given policy may not be rated through this framework. Now, once we have all the answers to the given questions, we use this tool in the way that we can see in this picture. So for example, for institutions and governance, we have 2 different questions. So based on the result from different questions, we come up with the final scoring for each category. So supposedly, if there is a medium and a weak scoring to 2 different questions, then we end up having a final score of M, which is medium. And similarly, we get it for all other categories, namely resourcing, oversight, and legal status as well. So based on this framework, the resulting rating for the National Solar Mission has come out to be a front runner, which is the best category according to this framework. And the reason for National Solar Mission to have this front runner rating is essentially because it has a very strong ratings for all the 4 areas, that is legal status, oversight, resources, and institutions. So when it comes to this mission, it is supported by the National Action Plan on Climate Change as well as the Electricity Act. The mission is also very transparent, and it keeps the results are publicly available on a regular basis. It is financially supported by government budgets, which cover subsidies, incentives, as well as infrastructure. And if we talk about the institutions and governance, the mission involves various national and state level institutes. Coming to the second policy intervention, that is the Indian carbon market. This one has got a rating of strong. And the reason is that there is a very strong legal, institutional, and governance backing for this one. And mainly this policy is being built on India's experience with tradable energy saving certificates under the PAT scheme. When it comes to legal aspect, Indian carbon market is anchored in the 2022 amendment to the Energy Conservation Bill, which was actually enacted in 2001. Coming to the 2 specific categories of oversight and resources, we have used a value judgment and put them in the category of non-rated yet, because since this one is a very new intervention, and also it's at a very nascent stage. So we didn't find it justified enough to put them in a weak or a medium category at this stage. And hence, because of these 2 ratings, the overall ratings has been impacted, and hence the Indian carbon market comes under the rating of strong. lastly, the green hydrogen mission. Now, this one also has a overall rating of strong. And the reason mainly is that, again, the oversight is not rated yet. Although the report suggests that there is a need to strengthen the regulatory framework. But when it comes to the legal backing, the budgetary requirements, and the institutions and governance, everything comes under the strong category. The green hydrogen mission is supported by a significant budget and also global partnerships. So that is what essentially giving it strong backing. For the legal status, again, this one is also withdrawing, this one is getting its strength from the Electricity Act of 2003. And lastly, when it comes to institutions and governance, there is a very comprehensive and integrated approach with the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy at its core. So overall, the ratings is strong for this one as well. If we have to conclude the findings of the report, then what we see on the left panel is essentially the ratings that we get for all the three policy interventions that have been chosen for the study. And this is also the reason why we saw a high ambition check on the very first slide. So essentially, all these policy interventions, the National Solar Mission, the Indian Carbon Market, as well as the Green Hydrogen Mission, they are crucial for a sustainable future for India. And they all are showing commitment to reducing the emissions, the carbon emissions. And they're also aligned with the economic and the environmental goals. And hence, like overall, the ratings that we find are strong, like except for the solar mission, which is a front runner according to our study. Everything overall is high ambition and comes under the strong category. I will stop here and I would request Mr. Rashmi to moderate this panel and maybe give us his insights on the report.
Very good, we are not on time. Good afternoon and welcome once again, everyone. It's so nice to see both Mahua and Ulka on the screen. It's indeed, the report is very good. It speaks very highly of the three missions or three initiatives which the Government of India has taken. And it's very obvious. So far the assessments that have been made by government agencies, private agencies, and international agencies, they have been by and large very positive, and they have rated India's performance really well. So in that sense, the report is very much in line with what everyone has been saying. I'll just add two additional points here that, as Manish was mentioning initially, that we have to look at these initiatives as part of an overall ecosystem. So, and then the second point I would like to add is the question of ambition, the question of overall transition, either in the context of 2030 goals or 2070 goals of net zero transition. So while the initiatives are doing very well, they can be rated very well on the four pillars which methodology is built on. Methodology only talks of governance, institutions in governance, resources, the progress in terms of oversight or reporting, and the legal framework. But it doesn't talk of ambition. It doesn't talk of overall, transition role. So I would think that if we really have to see the effectiveness or the efficacy or sufficiency or adequacy of these efforts, purely from national point of view, not entering the global debate at all. Purely from national point of view or domestic point of view, should we look at that as well? So that is an open question to the panelists, but you are free to counter or free to support or in whichever manner you like. That is one. As far as the assessment itself is concerned, I think its methodology is fairly strong. The assessment and the ratings are good. So the additional element there, which I would like to mention, is that these three are important missions. Now, climate transparency, which is a partner in this study, they have been looking at many other initiatives also. So, for maybe convenience sake, these three initiatives have been highlighted or identified, but there are certainly many more than this. So they can also be perhaps assessed on the sideline or outside this study to be able to actually convey the degree of the overall sense of adequacy and intensity of the achievement that India will be making. So these are broadly my initial thoughts. And then once again, I compliment the people who have participated in this research. It's an extremely useful study, both from domestic discourse and also the global discourse point of view. Because there are few countries in the world who have spent so much of energy and resources on this aspect. There are countries which have been talking about renewable energy for a very long time, but they haven't moved. And it's really indeed creditable for a country like India to have moved this much in just last 10 years. This is indeed a commendable achievement. So maybe timeline is another dimension on which the performance can be assessed. I remember when the National Solar Mission was launched, the target was just 20,000 megawatts. And that was not very long ago. It was in 2008. And we are in 2023. So in a matter of 14 years, we have seen a quantum jump from 20,000 megawatts to 500 gigawatts in terms of targets. But in terms of achievement also, if you look at it, it's very substantial. So, but of course, the goal is still far away. Not that everything is hunky-dory. So that is my last point. That if you look at the final transition goal, there are other things which we need to look at in the ecosystem. And what are those things? One is the distribution system, the energy distribution system, which basically determines the way you consume it and where you transmit it. So transmission costs and the distribution costs also need to be factored in when you look at the entire energy system. And this is a very critical piece of work that India will have to do. This is a part of transition goal. I'm certainly not saying anything to detract from the importance of these initiatives, but I'm only highlighting the seriousness of the challenges that lie ahead. So, and then last point is the energy reforms in general, energy pricing reforms in general, where states will need to be brought on board. It is not enough for the government of India alone to take lead. It has taken very important steps. It has driven these changes and this transformation so far entirely with the driven through the Ministry of Power and other connected ministries. I think time has now come that we get it on board. There are many states who are actually opposing the energy sector liberalization. So it is there, that is where the challenge will really lie. So that is the final piece, which I think should be a part of overall assessment. It is then that we will finally land a complete and comprehensive picture. So once again, lauding the very good report and the good score that these initiatives of the Government of India deserve to get. Maybe next part of our study should be as to how to advance it further and close the gaps. So with this, let me invite Ulka first for her comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rashmi, and thank you so much to Terry for inviting me to this webinar. I'm always very happy to come back to Terry in person as well as virtually. And thank you very much for sharing this very interesting, thought-provoking report. I'll speak about three aspects of the report. The first is about this implementation check framework itself. The second is specifically about the dimension of oversight. And the third is just echoing Manish's and Mr. Rashmi's comments about ecosystem. I'd like to speak a little bit about the private sector participation. So let me just start with the first point about the framework, and I'll quote from the report. It says, this early check is important as policy outcomes and impacts on greenhouse gas emissions are typically only measurable several years after implementation, leaving little time for course correction if implementation of the policy is weak. I think that's a really admirable sentiment and really places the importance of this. It's not so much accountability to the international community, but really just learning and making policy making adaptive. So while the three examples that have been given in the report are all strong on implementation, I feel that let's also learn from some of the weaker examples that might have come up. I mean, I would say weaker within quotes. Perhaps where there was a less clear home for the policy implementation, or where there were trade-offs that were revealed. For example, do you house a policy in an agency with a very clear mandate, but relatively limited powers across government? And you risk siloing that policy by housing it within an agency where the administrative feasibility may be very high. Do you do this, or do you actually try to grapple, as many researchers are suggesting, with a new institutional framework to attempt horizontal and vertical integration? So perhaps there were some cases of a different sort of approach, and we could learn for that. Or perhaps it is that the political economy factor is such that top level backing, for example, from the Prime Minister or the Chief Minister of State, is the make or break factor for the visibility that a particular policy gets and for the resources that it is able to attract, not just in terms of allocation of public resources, but even being able to attract private investment or philanthropic capital. So that might be a very admirable way of having strong implementation, but climate change will need many other levels of mainstreaming and institutionalization. So in the implementation check framework, I would suggest let's also learn from less strong examples and benefit from hindsight. My second point is about the oversight dimension, which is, I think, in all the three examples that you've given, I think oversight is the area that emerges as where there is room for improvement. While all the other dimensions appear to have a strong expectation of a government role, is there room in the oversight dimension for civil society participation, independent data collection and analysis? For example, for the carbon market, if you look at it only from the lens of a government role of strong implementation by the government, then the only concern might be to avoid double counting of credits that are traded within the country and those that are traded outside the country, but reported against the achievement of India's NDC. But from a more private perspective, the issue of integrity is these days becoming almost one of public perception. If people start suspecting all carbon trading of being mere greenwashing, then they become cynical that all corporate action, all market-based mechanisms are just PR. And that is counterproductive, I feel, for climate action in the country. So I strongly feel that the oversight aspect is important, not just as part of the official institutional mechanism, but also as part of larger civil society participation in the climate cause. And of course, of avoiding any inadvertent consequences that we can detect or catch at an early stage before they start manifesting at a really significant scale as we scale up our climate action over the coming decades. And once again, I feel this is not so much a matter of reporting to international audiences as of holding ourselves accountable to our own citizens. My third and last point is about private sector participation. I think all three of your examples, the solar mission, the hydrogen mission, the carbon market, all have very strong private sector driving or participation. And this is perhaps private sector participation, also perhaps energizing policy target setting in many cases. For example, EV targets or the very active conversation on CBAM that is happening in the country with industry. And this is what a paper that my organization, WRI and others, a few years ago had referred to as an ambition loop, that the more successful examples there are of private sector participation, subnational industry, the more it actually increases the confidence of national level target setting and implementation. Also, we hope that in the examples that you've given for solar and hydrogen, that much of the capital for these very large investments will come from the private sector and not just from public resources. So if you look at it from a financing lens, from a resource lens, as your dimension talks about, what industry wants is regulatory certainty, clear direction. But this has also very real implications for the cost of capital, the perceived regulatory certainty. And yesterday we had an event in Bihar, and one of the major policy implications that came out if Bihar were to attempt a net zero 2070 target is that the state has such limited land and renewable energy potential, it will have to purchase renewable energy from other states. And this will mean long-term power purchase agreements with other states. So again, the need for, the link between finance, regulatory certainty, and private sector participation. But apart from this, there is also implications for distributed sectors like transport, where you have multiple ministries, you have industry driving EV ambition, customers purchasing EVs or using other fuels, oil and gas stations being a private sector enterprise, but also complicating factors such as the Civil Aviation Ministry has a 2050 target in line with the International Civil Aviation Organization. Railways has a 2030 target. Consumers need to have behavioral change in opting for public transport. So it's quite a complex implementation check when it comes to sectors like this. And I think that needs to be acknowledged if, in the framework. So I fully support, Manish, what you and Mr. Rashmi pointed out about the ecosystem, but just wanted to emphasize the many reasons why it is important to reflect this in the framework. I'll end my comments with that. Thank you. I think you're muted.
You're on mute. I think the room is on mute. It's back.
No, it's fine.
Am I audible now?
Now you're back, sir. Yeah.
Thank you, Ulka, for your comments. Very useful and very insightful comments. You have highlighted the role of civil society, possible role for civil society in monitoring the progress, the oversight, the involvement of the private sector, which is absolutely critical, and how we can enhance that role, maybe in future iteration of the report, they will take this into account in developing the framework. So it's your turn, Mahua, now.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
So thank you for Terry for having me at this event. And once again, I'm so sorry I could not be there in person. At 4:30, I have to be at AeroCity, so I have to run when this finishes. Firstly, very, very nice report. I really like the way it's been laid out. It's practical, it's easy to relate. And I also fully appreciate and agree with Rashmi sir's observations that this is in line with where the impression of us is more generally. Like international impressions of India doing a lot on our net zero, clean, green, sustainable is very normal discourse today. So very much in line, and it's very much in line with the level of effort that we are spending inside the country to do all of this work. I have 5 points and they're not all related, but I thought I'll just share them here. I'm coming at these from the point of view of an implementer. And then throughout my career, what I try to do is come back to policy and offer suggestions and feedback, and let's see if we can make policy better so that policy allows us to implement more. One observation that caught my attention was the issue of enforcement of demand. And maybe it's right through with our hydrogen mission. It will come up in our carbon market work. Through the years that I've spent in the carbon market, if there's one thing I've learned, it responds very much for us to be able to get a decent carbon price that reflects a certain level of effort. You not just need the line of sight for how long that policy will be there, but then assurance, or at least a sense that that demand for the carbon credits will also be around. It's like your tax. I always know as a company I'm going to get taxed. So if we can offer that sort of certainty to entities, I think our carbon market then is a very, very powerful mechanism for us to achieve our goals well ahead of 2070. And I'll be honest, I can't see I can't imagine 2070. For me, it's like 20 years is what I can play with, 30 years maybe. 2070 is so far out that in fact, it's very much doable that we use a market like this. And if we design it and implement it and enforce it, then I think even some of our power sector issues that we have talked about over the years will start to get optimized. The second is on capacity. It's one thing, and I agree with Ulka, where do we place it, and do we make sure we place a policy in the right institutional setup? By right, I mean you have a line ministry that you report to. If the issue relates to other ministries, then there's a clear demarcation that other ministries are also responsible. But then the implementation agency is also empowered, is one thing, as Ulka was saying. But I'd go one step more. Empowered, yes. Does it have the capacity? So empowering is also to do with financial backing. Is there an institutional mechanism to conduct reviews and other such things that we do in the government to make sure things are on track? Is there enough capacity there to back it? Sometimes you need financial support. Sometimes you need to be a guarantee for something. Our market is not perfect. At different times, we need different sorts of assistance. So I take one step forward and say, I think I'm not sure, but let's make sure that we have the level of capacity that is necessary. And of course, timelines. We must hold ourselves to certain timelines. One observation came out from the solar mission over the years. We've done really well on renewables. But what made us do so well? One of the factors that is my observation is we have had constant attention to renewable energy. At the highest levels, it so happened that the solar prices fell and our private sector market picked up, yes, but we've also had constant monitoring, constant check, and constant attention we've done course corrections along the way. We've brought back feed-in tariffs, we've brought back the ceiling. So this course correction and this collaborative mechanism of managing something, I think is one of the nicer principles that have allowed us to be proud of our solar work, of our renewables work. Maybe we could put that in, that let's make sure that there's an iterative process of engaging between government and the market and backwards. You don't have to always listen to what the industry says, but useful because at the end of the day, they will also implement. So some two-way street, we make that part of our system. Two other things that come to mind. And I don't want to sound like a dampener, but I should give us a warning. We have great ambitions. Our ambitions are so clear. They're so ambitious. They're so inspiring. But 5 levels down from our ambitions, we have a lot of daily encumbrances. Evacuation, land, line titling, people, consultation, moving people, not moving people. I mean, the number of, in the buses business, in the electric mobility business where I'm most familiar, I mean, we are working on paper as a bus enters a depot, it goes in at 7:07. It needs to come back out at 7:29. There's a person with a piece of paper registering that. So that is 10 levels down. But even at 5 levels down, we have a lot of daily small things that make it hard for business to operate efficiently. And this can get quite tiring. Over time, it gets tiring. So I don't have a solution, but I think we should also pay attention to our own systems that we've built over the years that make it not very easy to do business at scale. Although at scale is the only way out, so we don't have a choice. We have to do it. And my last comment, and again, I don't have a solution, so I feel bad for raising it. Yes, states have to come on board, sir. I fully agree with you. Of course, I mean, that's a given. But our federal system makes it quite hard. The ping-ponging makes it hard. But there's no other way. We have to find some mechanism to wade through the federalism. Is it a carrot and stick? Is it a seesaw? Is it sticks and carrots? Which way is it? Do we have a period of carrots and then a period of sticks? We don't always have both at the same time. Yeah, something. But in our federal system, it's not always. I mean, we have a messy system, and we have to keep that in mind. That when you do the ratings of these missions, ex post or let's say mid mission, let's pay some attention to federalism and give credit to those states or those policies that have worked in the federal system, where it's not always as easy to get every state on board, let alone at the same level of enthusiasm that the center wants to pull everyone towards. So I'll stop there for now, and I'll love to hear other people's thoughts.
Oh, thanks, Mahua, for your remarks. You have covered a very large range of issues, very wide ground, and thanks for that, because this really enriches the discussion. Your 3 positive points and 2 notes of not warning, but caution. We have taken note of that, and I'm sure other panelists and others will respond to that. You have to leave at 4:20, so you still have.
No, 4:30. I have to be somewhere at 4:30. I have time. Yeah.
We have enough time. Thank you. So now we have Dr. Ritu Mathur with us here. She's in the room, so I'll move to her and request her for her comments.
Thank you, sir. And yeah, I mean, I have 4 or 5 points, but I think in some ways they have at least been mentioned by one or the other speaker already, but I'll sort of just go over each of the things that I did have to say. So beginning, of course, I mean, I think, again, India has been walking the talk, and again, the report clearly shows that. Ulka did mention that there are some policies which may be weaker than the ones we've looked at, and I think that would again be important to see, how those other things play out in looking at how good we are on the implementation side. But I think as we are trying to scale up and try to do more of everything, it's also about moving from what we called technology readiness at some point in time to see which ones we pick up, to looking at readiness of the ecosystem as a whole. And again, here, I think many elements have been brought into the ecosystem discussion. A few more were pointed out by also with Ulga and Mahua. But again, I think for me, the ecosystem needs to sort of be ready to absorb whatever is being put out as production or generation. It has to be able to manage the operational aspect of whatever is being done. And it has to give the sense of a continued and growing kind of a demand. So again, I think points were made about being able to keep the investors sort of tuned into long-term investment decisions flowing into whatever we need to push. But I would think even smaller things like having the ecosystem robust enough in terms of repairs, operation, being able to run the show on a day-to-day basis is something which is important in an ecosystem to make it work. And I think it sort of again links with the point of, are we talking about things at a broad nationwide level, or are we starting to also demarcate between what happens at the state? So one state may be more successful just because operationally it is a little more easier to do things there. Another state or region may find it difficult because there are other kinds of on-ground challenges, maybe challenges of skill, maybe challenges of sort of being able to have other operational issues there. So I think knowing more granularly the kind of challenges which are likely to inhibit each of the policies is again something which becomes important to me. The point about demand creation again. So in case of, say, the green hydrogen policy, we're looking at not only domestic demand, but also trying to capture global demand to say this is how we want to grow and this is how we want to scale up. But again, how consistently do we know the kind of demand? How consistently will we be able to maintain and manage and channelize that growth will make a lot of difference, I think, to what we see in the future. And again, Mahua said 2070 is very far out. But yes, I think, again, we have to be able to do the short-term planning now and make it and have it as a target, etc. But we need to keep thinking about what to do for the future as well, so that at some point in time, we suddenly don't figure that, we're seeing a very different downturn and we are not prepared for it. We might as well see new technologies evolving. We might see need for changing. And that again brings me to the point about constantly monitoring things. So again, there was mention about the center and the federal system and how do we manage that. But I think tracking the success and or failure of policies at different subnational levels to understand and wean out what is making things work and what is making things fail, and be able to compare each of these things to figure out what needs to be done becomes the next very important thing when we are looking at implementation rather than choosing a particular technology. With regard to the methodology, and this is just a thought, but supposing the other countries like Argentina, etc., looking at, supposing all of them had similar things with regard to the legal and the 4 pillars that you had, would they all get the same rating? So again, when you're looking at the ecosystem, I think, and Mr. Rashmi also made the point that maybe separately, we need to have a look at some of the other things in the ecosystem. I think that's important because I'm sure there are differences between India and the other countries, but whether similar kind of tick marks on the 4 pillars are likely to give everybody the same kind of result. It may not really be true if we looked at all the other points in the ecosystem as well. So that is something which I would leave just as food for thought and seeing whether that would make a difference. So I think that's pretty much what I, at this point, wanted to say and end with that.
Yeah, thank you, Ritu. That was quite useful and enriching. You have made 4 very important points. One is, overall point that you made was about looking at the granularity of the schemes in terms of actual implementation and ability to deliver technology readiness or capacity at the state level, or creating the demand for the products and services, and being able to one very critical thing which important strikes me is that one way of low cost incentivization is to perhaps do to find out why some states are doing better than others. And I'm sure the ministry the government agencies would be involved in that. But that's, I don't know whether we can do this as part of this exercise in future, or we can do it separately. But that's an important part of the ecosystem. Because if we all know, if we are all committed to reach somewhere, and we know some parts are moving, some parts are not, there obviously there is an explanation involved there. We can easily identify the reasons there and try and close the gap. So thank you very much. We don't have any other speaker at this moment, so we are all here. If there are any questions from anyone, to the panelists or to the researchers, you're free to raise any point.
I think some of the participants, while registering for the webinar, they mentioned their specific questions as well. But before we go to that, just wanted to quickly reflect on what has been said. What I broadly heard three things emerging from the observations made by Ulka, Mahua, and Ritu. One is that the framework right now is more about what is. So it's more static in its description and nature, whereas the realization of implementation capacity would be in the dynamism that is there in the system, and how different interventions add or sometimes become the weakest link in that dynamism. So that is one important intervention I heard. In one way or other, I think everybody talked about that. If we are able to somehow capture dynamism in the ecosystem, rather than simply looking at how much money is currently there, what is the monitoring mechanism right now, which is the implementing agency, and move beyond that, what is likely to interact with what is possible and what is expected, what is desirable. If the framework is able to capture that is something that would be more useful check. I absolutely agree with that point. In fact, when we chose these three cases compared to what was initially intended, because the tool was intended to assess individual policy, but we looked at policy which has been implemented for 15 years now in the solar mission, something which has been introduced just now but has similar experience in the carbon market, and third, which is futuristic, which is the third point that Ritu was more emphasizing, whether the system is gearing up for dealing with new technologies. So that's how we. So while the simpler framework did not have necessarily the criteria capturing the dynamism, in its application we tried to catch it a little bit, but that's the hope, that whether that's possible at all with the simple check, or we necessarily need to develop a comprehensive check to capture that dynamism. So I think that these two are very important observations. And the third, of course, is who are the actors other than government and how they are part of the implementation capacity and readiness. That I think is something that will necessarily need to have a separate element in the framework. I think that's a very useful suggestion. So thank you all for all these inputs. Now I'll ask Tanvi to share the questions. But before Tanvi shares the questions which we received already from the participants, those who are online, I would suggest that if you have any questions, please write them in the chat box and we'll pick them up. You need not necessarily ask questions. If you have any comments also, you can write that down. So thank you. Yes, Tanvi.
So far we have 2 questions that the participants have asked during the registration time. The first one goes as, how prepared are the stakeholders, including government bodies, NGOs, private sector entities, and local communities to engage and coordinate in implementing climate actions? This is from Dr. Shruti from EMPRI. And the other one is by Mr. Rajiv Pramanik from EKI Energies. He asked how soon the market will be up and running. So these are the 2 questions that we have so far. So
Ulka, would you like to give your thoughts on how we can involve the communities, stakeholders more intensively in this whole exercise of climate actions?
Thank you. Thanks very much. It's a very comprehensive question. I'll attempt to address only parts of it in terms of how prepared are these different stakeholders in implementing climate action. I think the short answer to that would be that that they are reasonably prepared, but we need to provide more forums and processes and time for their participation and for iterative conversations and building of capacity. If we have these forums and processes, then we will understand better what the gaps and barriers are, how we can, how preparedness can be enhanced, and how action can be co-evolved and co-implemented. Yesterday we were in Bihar, in Patna, for a conference on climate change, and I think it was wonderful in the sense that many aspects, many dimensions of your implementation check were seen, were visible. Like you had high-level government commitment and leadership. You had to some extent financial resources allocated because Bihar has had a green budget now, so they're at least tracking that. There is some amount of oversight. For example, the Jal Jeevan Haryali mission that is the flagship program of the government and environment, that has regular oversight by the chief minister and high-level officials. So many elements of the implementation preparedness are there. There are agencies that are empowered. There are civil society NGOs. But of course, in India, as with everything, there is room to do so much more. So let me just pause there because I can come back in case there are any specific examples or issues that I can add to. But I would just say that, and we don't have a solution to this, what are the ways in which we could have more forums for engagement? One of the things that we're going to do in Bihar is actually have one event in each division of the district, of the state, in order to create more awareness, in order to take more feedback, in order to understand what the implementation of the strategy would look like at the divisional level. But of course, at the district level, at the block level, there is no end to which one needs to go for effective implementation. So let me just pause there by saying I don't have any clear answers, except to always be optimistic and keep providing more channels for give and take. Thanks.
That's very, very useful. Mahua, over to you for your thoughts. How to enhance the involvement of the stakeholders, and also the question on markets. When will it kick in?
Yeah. So let me take that first one. It's a very broad question. I think I've understood it as some of it is linked to um, preparedness is a function of all of the things, of course, that Ulka said. They need to have identified the organizations, the entities, empowered them, made sure they have resources and capacity. I think we'll have to do one more piece of work. This goes back to the 5 levels below comment. In my head, it sits at ease of doing business, in the bucket of ease of doing business, which is linked to, do we have at these institutions, do we have the procedures in place? Do we have an understanding that we'll keep it nimble? Do we have an consensus understanding that mid-course correction is not a bad thing, provided you don't do too much of changes too quickly, but generally it's not a bad thing. Then do we have a dispute resolution system? So can we maybe spend little effort to think through stuff? So organizations are identified, they're empowered, they have capacity. And then are they actually ready? And I think some portion, at least my contribution there would be the whole bucket of ease of doing business. In many of our areas that we work in, we are either coming in to retrofit something or we're starting from scratch. When we're starting from scratch, we don't have anything to go with, so we have to write it from scratch. But when we're retrofitting, we have the old legacy rules, and they're often in conflict with whatever our mission is. So I would just put it over there. Maybe we should all, as a community, perhaps this is a piece of work that even Terry can take up. Do some analysis of which states did better than others, but why did they do better than others? And did they think through the steps one by one? Even in our renewables business, it's not easy to get to your post PPA or even to a PPA. All the daily issues add up and people have no choice, so they just have to deal with it. Land buying, it's not easy to buy land still. When will it start? I think so. That's a BE question. There's a formal start date, but when will it become fully? Let me reword that, or take the liberty to reword that. Officially, there's a start date, and that's up to BE. But for us, when will it be a functioning market? I put two things. Instead of saying maybe I'll put an estimate of time involved, perhaps it'll be 2 years for a functioning market. But I think it's a function of companies feeling like this target that's on them is here to stay. When that sinks in, investment planning accounts for this. And so will we make sure that we have the resolve in the carbon market to ensure the efficiency standards that are put in for each of the obligated entities and those sectors, that they are enforced and fully enforced over a period of time without any lapses?
Okay, thank you. But for that kind of certainty to emerge, I think, I don't know whether the guidelines of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency are adequate enough.
Not yet, sir. Yeah, not yet. It took Europe almost a decade to come to a common realization that the ETS is here to stay.
It's only when the emissions intensity target will kick in,
Yeah.
maybe for 2026. So
Yeah.
we still are 2 years away there.
Yeah.
Over to you, Dr. Macho,
Yeah. So, I mean, again,
for both the questions to prepare.
yeah. So I think on the first one, again, if we look at how prepared are we, I think we are moving ahead. And if I again take the example of Niti Aayog, I think in the recent past, setting up the state support mission and sort of looking more deeply at the states, getting people engaged at the states, I think that is one push which has happened more from the government side as well. But then, as Ulka is saying, there's a lot of action which is happening from the states themselves, also in terms of engaging and in terms of getting people interested to sort of look at what can be done within each of the states. So I think that, again, cohesiveness and continued interaction between all kinds of stakeholders to see that things can be moved from multiple perspectives, from a clean energy and decarbonization perspective, of course, but also from the development perspectives and the local needs of the people. I think that needs to continue. And again, having multiple dialogues, having multiple and iterative, bringing together of the stakeholders remains very important in terms of seeing what Manish called the dynamism. So for us to constantly understand what the challenges are on ground, try to think of a solution, make sure it gets implemented, see the success story, replicate it, compare it. So again, I think there's a lot which remains to be done in the ecosystem. The other thing which is also going to be launched soon from a NEETI point of view is a portal to show the state's progress very soon. So again, I think things like these will start enabling comparisons for people to see what have been the success stories, for people to emulate each other, learn from the mistakes of others, but also adapt to look at how things can be done better. So I think the system is evolving in multiple ways towards a better way forward. But much, again, as I said, remains to be done, so we can do so much more. In terms of the carbon markets, again, I completely echo with what Mahua says. We will need to see how these guidelines evolve. And I think for people to get the confidence that the sectoral shares are there, and for the price to be discovered in a way that people are confident that they would be able to have the carbon market effectively running. That is, I think, a very important decision factor. Stop with that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, any other question? So,
I wanted to, if you allow, come back to Ulka on, for that matter, everybody, because in one way or other that point has come up, is when we think about the role of other actors than government, and in creating the ecosystem, one observation, at least from the interaction with the private sector, has been that they always look for at least a clear policy direction, clarity, regulatory clarity and certainty, in order to come forward and say we want to play a role and we'll play a role. But it's almost always conditional upon certain type of clarity from the government, if not also a demand for financing. Particularly when we talk about adopting newer technologies, the viability gap funding is the first thing that you hear from industry. So it is in that context I think we need to realize that the role of government is much more beyond policy making and implementing it in its technical sense. But I feel there is a greater role of government to exercise its ability to convene, the soft power that the state has to convene different stakeholders. So do you have any thoughts on that? That what role, how the openness of the government, proactiveness of government on exercising the power of convening will play in making the ecosystem more vibrant?
Manish, you always ask very difficult questions. I don't think I have a very good answer. What I can do is I can just start us off on some thinking, and then I'm sure Mahua and Ritu have much richer examples and insights to offer. To me, when you were sort of outlining your question, two thoughts came to my mind. One is that the regulatory certainty or that direction of travel that the private sector seems to expect or seems to desire need not only come from the government of India in the Indian context, it can even come from other governments. So if in the EU Fit for 55 or its electric mobility legislation, if they say that, if the EU market says that it's not going to purchase more, allow sale of electric vehicles beyond a certain year, well, that gives the direction of travel even to Indian vehicle manufacturers. So while I agree, while I appreciate the various types of government roles that you outlined and the various ways in which the government and non-governmental actors interact with each other, I think this is also one dimension that we need to think about. So the very active conversation about IRA, about CBAM, all of this is actually telling industry that Indian industry, that it needs to be proactive. It has partnerships, it has units abroad, it's part of global supply chains. So it is a much broader conversation that is at work. The second point I was also thinking was that, when you say that industry does expect funding, does ask for different types of financial incentives, some of these, yes, are direct, like the PLI schemes, but that is because the government is trying to solve multiple problems. It is not only trying to increase renewables in the energy mix in terms of installation, but it is also trying to generate jobs in that process, manufacturing jobs, not just those involved in installation and servicing. So some of the funding expectations or some of the funding related instruments that government is deploying are because it is trying to solve or trying to address multiple policy goals. But otherwise, I think what industry would want is regulatory certainty from the government in order to have the cost of raising private capital in the open market also reduced. So maybe there the role of government is to provide some kind of risk guarantee mechanism, and I'm sure Mahua can speak much better to some of these recent attempts to do that. So let me just pause there, and I'll come back if I want to add anything over there. But yeah, there are many different aspects that the government can play many different roles in a way that both private and public action can build on each other and lead to scaling up and achievement of these very ambitious targets. Thanks.
Mahua, any thoughts on this?
Thank you, sir. So I have, yes, I do have one thought on this. I want to just convey back to Manish, when private companies ask for certainty of regulation, they ask for as much as they can get, and they will keep asking for as much as they can ever get. There is nothing called full certainty of regulation ever, which is why we have an iterative process and mid-course corrections, and things change, market changes. We have downturns and swings. So don't take that too hard. Just bear in mind, they will always do it. They have functions in corporations whose only job is to do that. Now, that said, are they happy with direction of travel? Yes. Because some of the risk takers will stick their necks out when they get a signal that is in the direction of travel category. And that is all about competitive behavior. Would they want a little bit more than direction of travel? Yes. And that's good for us as well as an economy, because we do want jobs and job creation, and we want that value creation happening here. Now, on the other side, what they actually really want, and what should perhaps be even more the role of government, is to make sure that the contractual structure is honored. So if there is a contract in place between public and private, then that contract has to be trusted that it will be honored. We've had a lot of bad experience in our renewable energy business. And I think we should really internalize that and take that to heart. Why is it that we cannot raise money against any contract that faces a municipal corporation? Nobody trusts that you'll ever get paid. And even outside bodies don't trust that you'll get paid. Whereas outside in the international world, in other OECD countries, municipal corporations are very creditworthy. But we have a system where our municipalities have no money. So I think what industry much more wants than this certainty of regulation is that the particular contract in place with the government will be honored.
Yeah, and to my thing, I don't have very much to add because I think I completely agree with what Mama said. So, ask it.
Thank you. I think since there are no further questions, and we have still have about an hour left, is it?
Half an hour,
Half an hour. Okay.
but practically just 10 minutes.
Right. So thank you very much. I mean, it has been an extremely interesting session, and we have used the opportunity of discussing these three initiatives, major initiatives in the renewable energy sector, as an opportunity to discuss many other things in the wider ecosystem, and very rightfully so, because these are critical for our own policy making and implementation. It is important to understand the overall framework in which these missions are placed, these initiatives are being carried out. So a number of points which Mahua, Ulka, and Ritu have made, there is a lot of commonality on that, but 2-3 things which strike me. One is the issue of creating demand for these in the carbon market, as well as the other products in the energy system, regulatory certainty, and the nimbleness, which Mahua used very striking word, the ability to do things and deliver things in a manner that we are able to revisit the policies, the steps, and revise them, and then come back quickly to be able to deliver them in time. So maybe the ease of doing activity, apart from the regulatory certainty, regulatory and legal certainty, which all of you have emphasized. The question of finance is really critical. This is one of the pillars on which this assessment has been done. But I am not sure as to how this finance is being actually assessed. Is it only the public resources are being taken into account, or also the private capital that is involved there? How that finance will be mobilized, and whether it will be mobilized on terms which will deliver the objectives of the mission, I'm not sure there. So while a budget is an important critical question, how do we assess the financial requirements and how that will be delivered? Maybe we'll need to go into a certain greater detail. The last point is the institutions. Yes, governance and institutions are together. This is a combined pillar. They look similar, but I think going by the experience and also by the comments of the panelists, I think institutional mechanism is an independent pillar by itself. That adds to the ease of doing business or ease of implementing the activity. If we have the right institutions in place, both at the central level and at the state level. We don't have, actually, if you ask me, it is driven entirely by the sectoral regulations of the concerned ministry. There is no overarching institutional framework either at the federal level or at the state level. This is a very, very important lacuna, very important gap. Many people have pointed it out. We have placed a number of guidelines in place, but those are basically good wishes, positive wishes, but they don't have teeth. So an institutional mechanism which has teeth, which has actually an enabling character, which can guide and drive the policy making in different ministries across the government setup, across the different stakeholders, is an important requirement. Last, just a suggestion for you. We have, the Niti Aayog has come up with something called a climate performance index for the states. Maybe it is time you come up with a climate readiness index for them. And that readiness index can include all of these things, where you can then the discourse will start going and filtering into the state level, because it is the states who have to be ultimately enabled to implement these activities beyond a certain point. And the demand creation cannot take place unless the states are involved. So I think that is another thing which may help, and it can be a good way of another research activity for TERI, maybe for NITI and for climate transparency. If we can build something like this, it will also help everyone. So I'll stop there and thank you. Over to you, Anish.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Ritu, Ulka, and Mahua for your excellent inputs. It certainly has opened up a lot of new ideas. And I think the whole idea was that we start a discussion on this, and if it leads something to like what sir has suggested, that if there is a climate readiness index at a granular level, at a subnational level, that would be, and of course I'm sure all of us would be happy to contribute and to that type of work. So I don't have much to say in terms of closing remarks, but to thank you guys again for your time and for your reflections. Of course, this was a very short study, so kind of testing the idea itself. So this certainly gives that there is merit in pursuing this line of thinking and developing kind of a much more comprehensive tool. Although it seems, I know it would be very difficult to turn all the inputs that have been received into easy to apply tool, but that I think is an important challenge. So we'll certainly try to do that, and probably we'll try to do it in collaboration with all of us present here. And so I certainly look forward to a continued discussion and maybe more joint knowledge products around this theme, and hoping for a continued cooperation. So thank you for your time once again, and I must also thank Tanvi and Ashmita for coordinating this discussion and preparing the report. So thank you, everybody. Look forward the next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.